Hello and welcome to my final thoughts on Red Dead Redemption 2. Having finally finished the main story and the epilogue, I feel like I'm prepared to talk about this game now. For a brief non-spoiler thoughts on this game, I do not know that I can recommend Red Dead Redemption 2. I have a lot of cons and I have a handful of really good pros, but the cons really hold the game back for me. And the main part of that is the gameplay itself. I think the story is actually really good. I think the music is actually really good. But the gameplay of Red Dead Redemption 2, the things that you're doing most of the time, is not that fun to me. I'll get into why in just a moment when we move into spoiler territory. But I don't want to be spoiled on anything about this game. I just want to know Trey's thoughts. I do not think that Red Dead Redemption 2 is a $60 purchase. I think when it's cheaper, down on sale, that would be a perfect time to grab it up and just put a little bit of time into it every here and then. Don't just hardline, just rush it, but just put a little bit of time into it every once in a while. Take some time to spend out in the world, and I think you'll probably have a really enjoyable experience. I really think the game suffers from doing missions back to back to back to back, and I will get into that again in a little while. But for just a brief non-spoiler review, I do not think it's worth $60. Um, I do not recommend it at $60. But if you can get it for a pretty good price, sure. There's a lot of good stuff in this game, and I think it definitely has some enjoyable parts to it. From here, we're going to blow the door open on spoilers. We're just going to start with gameplay. I have a docket prepared. Most of this is not scripted, but I have some scripted sections. I have a docket prepared that has a breakdown of how I want to cover this today. And I'm going to start with the gameplay. The movement in Red Dead Redemption 2 is weird. I think the horse movement is pretty solid, other than some AI problems that we'll get into in a little bit. But the actual character movement is odd. It has a floatiness to it that it really doesn't feel like it should have. You're in very realistic areas where the world is just full of stuff to interact with, and so often I find myself skipping over the thing I'm trying to interact with and not being able to interact with the things I want to interact with because of the character's movement. You do get used to it eventually, but there are still going to be moments where in combat your hat gets shot off of you and you stop to try and pick up your hat, and it's, well, there's a body here, and now I'm picking up this body to try and get this body out of the way just so I can get to my hat because I want the hat and I can't seem to select the hat. And that's really frustrating. It's one of the core things that you do in a video game is move normally, and when the movement doesn't feel good, you have some problems. And this is a Rockstar thing where most of their games have floaty movement. GTA, for instance, has a lot of floaty movement, but it just feels like it's exacerbated in this game by all the things you need to interact with. And they did do some fixes that's going to be in my pros to be able to counteract this, but we will get to those when we get to those. I just think the movement itself is a problem in Red Dead Redemption 2, and it's unfortunately a pretty big one for me. Again, your mileage may vary. You may not find this a problem at all. But for me, it definitely took a lot of getting used to. And that's not something you really want in a big story-based long game where you're going to be making these mistakes over and over and over. The second big one for me in gameplay was guns. The gunplay and the way they shoot is not great. It's still using the old lock shoot system where you press left trigger to lock onto an enemy with auto lock. You're going to pretty much snap to them, and then press right trigger to fire. That system has never been great. It's serviceable, it does the job, but it's never been great for me. But in this game, it just feels outdated. It feels like when it's time to fight, there's going to be a million enemies. That's an exaggeration. There's more like 20, 25. And you are going to have to shoot all of them by left trigger, right trigger, left trigger, right trigger, left trigger, right trigger. And if they don't die on one right trigger, well, it's a second right trigger. Left trigger, right trigger, left trigger, right trigger, left trigger, right trigger. And that's combat in this game, which is unfortunate because I feel like it could have been a lot better suited without that, you know? I think if it had had something more like what Revolver had, then it would have been more interesting for me. Because I can still go back and play Red Dead Redemption 1, and sure, the system's still not great there, but Red Dead Redemption 1 is not as long as Red Dead Redemption 2. And over the course of Red Dead Redemption 2, you're going to be using that system a lot. And you can turn off auto lock and then manually aim everything. But that doesn't really solve the problem of that the gunplay just isn't great in these games for me. Again, mileage may vary. You may find this gunplay to be amazing. You may really enjoy shooting the guns in this game. But I did not at all. There was not a single situation where I was firing a gun in this game that I was like, man, this is great. I'm loving this. The gunplay is really tight, and it feels like I'm just barely pulling off these great shots. Instead, it was just, all right, here comes some more enemies. Boom, boom, boom. Use Deadeye to be able to get headshots. All right. While Deadeye's going on, your guns make a weird whoo that sounds like they're having to suck in a breath. It's an interesting sound, and I really came to enjoy it over the course of the playthrough. But it was just weird that this game is so polished in so many great ways, and the gunplay has not evolved at all. You can mix that up by using stuff like dynamite, or by using machetes and just running in for melee combat, but then you run into the problem of the enemies being extremely accurate, and because you get staggered if you get headshot, then you can have moments where you have cleared an entire area just about, and it's almost over, and one of the last remaining enemies shoots you in the head, and then shoots you in the head again, and you're just dead. You were at full health, and now you're at none. And it's very frustrating having to replay entire sections just because you got shot in the head. There were multiple moments on stream, some very important story moments that were not as heavy as they could have been because we got headshot and died instantly, when it should have been this big triumphant moment. The music was swelling and everything, but nope, you got headshot. And that, of course, goes to your allies as well, which is where we'll segue into mission structure in this game. So many missions in this game require you to defend your allies and protect your allies, and they can get headshot just like you can, which leads to frustrating situations where, just like before, you're doing everything right. You're killing the enemies, you have watched your health, you've made sure you had health tonics on you, you're doing everything right, and Charles gets shot, or Javier gets shot. And it's just this really frustrating moment of, I was doing everything I could do, and because they got headshot, we now have to redo this entire fight, which rolls back to gunplay, where it just feels like there's too much of the most basic shooting. And so when you have to redo the shooting, it's even less fun than it was before, because you're having to do it over and over and over again because your allies are dying. And I've had people tell me on stream, well, Trey, you're just killing them too slowly. So I started running in with a machete and just one-shotting everybody. It does not matter. If the AI gets a lucky headshot on one of your teammates, you just have to redo it. And those lucky headshots seem to happen far more often than luck would dictate. Maybe it's just bad RNG for me, but it happened a lot during the course of my playthrough. From there, you have the problem with mission structure that is just railroading every mission. You can't try to do things your own way. You can't try to do things in any other way than what it says to do them. Because if you do, you fail the mission and have to redo from your last checkpoint. You can't, for instance, when you're on a train and you're supposed to go through a car and there's enemies in that car, you can't go over that car and come back around from the other side, because it will count that as a failure, as you're abandoning the mission. There's a mission early on where you get a sniper rifle, and your instructions are to cover the crew. It's like, okay, I'll climb up here and have a good... Nope, you're not supposed to climb anywhere. You're supposed to ride with the crew and cover them from your horseback. There's so many missions where I had clever ways I wanted to do things, and the game just said, no, you cannot do this way. You have to do it the way we're telling you to do it. And that's incredibly frustrating. When you add that into the gunplay and how quickly your allies die, and it just becomes this whole situation of, I'm not enjoying this. And I wish that I could. If they had just given me a little bit of freedom here, I could do this my way. And that's really, really obvious compared to the open world, where you can do things however you want. I messed up a ton of things in the open world because of countless mistakes that I made. Not realizing that this person's quest required me to do this with them, or made a mistake here and didn't let this lady on my horse, so I didn't complete this side activity. But you can't do that in the story mode because everything is scripted and they want you to do it a very specific way. And I guess where this all comes to a head for me is in a early mission where you have to, we're in full spoilers now, by the way, in an early mission where you have to bust Micah out of jail, the people that Micah is trying to get you to kill are all cops. They're all policemen. They're all sheriffs and deputies, and they're people doing their job, and we are breaking a criminal out of jail. So I refused to kill them. So I went through the entire mission. Took me almost an hour of retrying the mission. Went through the entire mission with just my fist, not killing anybody. And when I finished that mission, I had a bounty for mass murder. Because the mission requires you to have canonically killed all those people. And it took me so out of the game, I almost quit right then. Because when you have a game that has so many options and so many tools at a character's disposal, to restrict them in that way, to force them to do it your specific way, is the worst way to do that. I don't really have a good segue to go from mission structure from there. But we'll move into AI, because there is some interesting stuff with AI in this game. There are good things about the horse AI, and there are bad things about the horse AI. One of the pros is that the horses all seem to have different AI. And I only played around with 7 horses in total. So I don't know if there is a, 10 horse AI limit. And a couple of my horses did react similarly. But most of the horses that I had treated me very differently. The main horse that I used for a long time, Schleppnir, would just lower her ears anytime I was messing with another horse, and would react and be jealous. And it was really cool to have that AI that was reacting to what I was doing. The horse that the stream fell in love with, Kelpie, was constantly trying to kill us, throw us off of cliffs, and run us into rocks, and into trees, and fences, and houses, and boards, and anything she could find. And it was cool to have these horses almost become characters in and of themselves because of the way they reacted. That they themselves had an AI, and they were doing things on their own. Con of horse AI is that pathing is terrible. When you try to just have a horse go from one spot to another, they'll get lost, they can wander off the path, they can get stuck on terrain, they will go off cliffs, they will run into other things, other horses, carriages. They just don't seem to have any survival instinct of their own, which is really weird when you compare it to how good the rest of the horse AI is. Where this really shines is when you try to auto run using the cinematic mode. I had 2 horses die because of auto run, because the pathing threw one into a carriage and threw another one off of a cliff. Your auto run should not be running horses to their death. Your auto run is there so that the player can put the controller down and go and get up and do something and come back and still cover that map. And we're going to get to the map in a minute. But the auto run doesn't work. It has the same problems that the rest of riding around in the world does, for no real reason other than just trying to go for the realism aspect of it. Of even when you're auto running, you're still covering that ground in real time, so anything could happen. And it really bothered me to be working on something and look over and my horse is dead underneath a carriage that he ran into for no reason. Even the horses in Breath of the Wild don't do that. Even they try to move around trees and other objects. And it was just really obvious that the pathing did not work the way that it was supposed to. From there you have enemy AI. And as we talked about earlier, the enemies are super lucky when it comes to shots. They can shoot you very well from almost any position. But the other frustrating thing with the enemy AI is that they know where you are, seemingly at all times, once you've alerted any of them. There were times where I would be on top of a building, and I'll have knifed a guy, but it didn't kill him, and so as he's fighting back, he's shouting, and then I'll run to the other side of the building so that they lose track of me, and they come around and shoot me. because they just always seem to know where you are once you've alerted them. There's no real rhyme or reason that I could figure out as to why, and this goes into the bounty system as well, where it feels like people half the map away can recognize that, hey, that's Arthur Morgan. But I don't have a huge problem with the bounty system. I do think the bounty system is broken, but it didn't really bother me that much because you can just pay your bounties off. It's the basic enemy AI that really bothered me. The idea that no matter where you are or what you're doing, if you get into a fight, the enemies figure out where you are. The fact that your horses, again, have bad pathing and will walk into people, which will then cause them to get mad at you, which will cause a fist fight. And if you win that fist fight, you can get arrested for causing a public disturbance. Which, sure, that makes sense, but it's not fun. Not for me, anyway. You have the other problem of your horse bumps into somebody and they pull a gun on you. So you pull a gun back and you shoot them, and then you're wanted for murder. Sure, I guess I did kill that guy. I guess I should be wanted for murder. But I also wish there was an option to be like, hey man, I'm really sorry about that. It was the horse's fault. And there's just not, you know? From there, enemy AI, the biggest issue that I have is that there's so many enemies. And because they always know where you are, they always know where to reinforce. So especially in missions where you're running away, they will come up from another angle to cut you off instead of coming up from behind you at a different angle in a lot of situations. You also have the animal AI. The animal AI, I think, is actually really solid. The animal AI is really good for the most part. You have the way that animals in the wild will run from you, the way that some of them will try to fight back, the way that when you're hunting, you have to track them down and they will move underneath trees or underneath big bushes if it starts to rain. The animal AI is really cool, and I think they did a really good job with it. Until the animals become enemies, and then you have the exact same problem. Now, I would say that a wolf being able to know where I am at all times would make sense because it's a wolf and it has a good sense of smell. A lot more than a regular person being able to know where I am at all times. But it can still be a problem, especially if you're surrounded by a pack of wolves and they just all know where you are no matter what. Like if you go to run away, they can just chase you down. And you have to run quite a good distance. And that's if your horse isn't so spooked that you can't ride your horse because it's throwing a fit. And again, those things make sense. And I'm sure a lot of people really like how realistic it is, but none of that was enjoyable for me. The world itself of Red Dead 2 is big and has a ton of stuff to do in it. Ton of stranger missions, ton of random events. However, because it's so big, this can lead to some really long rides. I think the longest that we timed was to try and get back up to the north for a mission with Sadie that I should have just accepted the offer the game gave me of being able to ride with her. But for the sake of argument, I would say that if I didn't take that offer because I needed ammo, it should not have taken me almost 10 minutes to get back over. That is an exceptionally long amount of time of riding my horse down the railroad tracks. Because that was the fastest route, even though the map didn't show that as the fastest route to get back there. The whole time you're riding across this vast map, going from one end to the other, trying to get stuff, you'll have these random events. And at first, these random events are really cool. Having prisoners come out with their shackles still on, and they need you to blow off their cuffs for them so they can get away. Having people that have been bit by snakes, or a lady that's been captured by a rival gang, and they're taking her back to their hideout, and you can free her. Or having a guy that's wife has gone missing and he needs help finding her. Like, there's a lot of really cool missions. Unfortunately, they begin to repeat. And this can lead to situations where Arthur is like, again, when somebody's like, man, I got bit by another snake. And it's like, okay, yeah, all right, we're going to just give him another tonic. And it just becomes a drain on resources and not an interesting situation anymore. It's just, okay, here's this guy who's riding past me claiming that they've got the wrong guy. And eventually, I just stopped helping him. And just let him ride off with him. because I had helped him so many times. And it's just stuff like that makes me go, man, if you're only going to have like 10 random events for a map this big, don't have them replay. And I understand that would make the map even more empty than it already is of stuff to do while you're riding from one side to the other, but at least then it feels like I've solved that problem. There are some map-specific random events that can happen for areas and specific spots on the map, and those are really cool. I wish instead there had just been more of those and less of the repeatable random events. While you're riding from one end of the map to the other to go from mission to mission, though, or to hunt, or whatever it is you're trying to do, there are towns that you can visit. And the towns are really cool. The towns are shantified. There are beds that are right for the amount of people that are in them, which is a huge thing for me. They're smaller towns that don't have as much, or the bigger towns that have quite a bit more. Some towns have a barber that's mixed in with a saloon. Some towns have just a barber shop. It's really cool to see the differences depending on where they are. But this leads to another big problem that I have with this game, which is when you go into a shop, you can then either browse the shelves and have to deal with the movement, as I talked about earlier, or you can go to the catalog. Catalog fixes the problem of the shelves for me completely. Such a good idea to have the catalog be a real thing in the world that you can look at. And it would make sense for the shop, for if they don't have any more of this in stock, then you could use the catalog to be able to get the thing that you need. Now, unfortunately, with how much this game, weighs into realism, if you take everything from the shelf that would be for an item, it just instantly regenerates in front of you on the shelf. Which for a game that is very, sometimes I would say goes too far trying to be realistic, that's a weird thing, especially when they have the catalog behind them. But either way, you go to the catalog and you can order anything you want, except for the items that are chapter locked. So, and it doesn't tell you they're chapter locked either. We saw the Mauser in Strawberry pretty early on, and I wanted to buy the Mauser because the Mauser seems really cool. It might have been in Valentine, not Strawberry, let me clarify. And I wanted the Mauser pistol. I thought that'd be a really cool pistol to have for Arthur Morgan. So we saved up enough money to get it. We went hunting, we sold skins, we sold meat. We saved up enough money to get it. And we couldn't buy it because we weren't far enough in the game yet. Even though it was in the catalog and was obviously there. And that was another one of those moments where I was like, okay, I need to just take a step away from this game. Because if it's gonna be in the catalog, you should be able to buy it. This world is so built on realism until it isn't, and that really takes me out of it. It was hard to get immersed in this game because of stuff like that. And you say, well, you're just nitpicking. But what if instead the Mauser was not in the catalog because you could not buy it yet, even if you had enough money? And again, remember, it does not tell you it's chapter locked. It just does not let you buy it. We had to Google it to figure out why it wouldn't let us buy it. What if instead it was not in that catalog, and then when you got to the right chapter and went to see the next gunsmith, he had a throwaway line of, oh, we got a new catalog in. And you go over and you flip it open and it's, oh, hey, there's a Mauser here now. That's really cool. I want to buy that. Instead of, it's there, but you can't have it yet because you're not far enough into the story. And like little things like that are all over this game. Moments where they put so much thought into this thing and this thing and this thing that they missed this thing, And it just feels bad as a player not being able to get the things that you want to get because they're chapter locked. And I understand why they're chapter locked. That gun does more damage, but again, just don't have it in the catalog then. The other thing you have to deal with in the world are rival gangs. You may ride through a spot and it be perfectly fine the first time, but the next time you're riding through, there's going to be a rival gang there. And they will try to stop you or pull you off your horse so they can shoot you and take your money. What this leads to are moments where you're riding across the map and some cool interactions with rival gangs that try to stop you. But then other times where you have helped a stranger with a random event, like 2 feet down the road, and they need a ride back to town, and on the way through, you get stopped by a rival gang, and in trying to get away from that rival gang and kill them, the stranger gets shot and dies, and you fail that random event. Situations where you find a horse that has really great stats, and you track it down and you lasso that horse, and it was really tough to tame and to break it and to get it ready to ride back to a stable so you can saddle it up without losing your current horse. And on the way there, you get stopped by a rival gang, and the O'Driscolls shoot your horse and kill it in one shot. And it's just stuff like that that makes me go, man, these rival gangs are terrible. Because they never show up at a time where, it seems like anyway, for me, they never showed up at a time where I didn't have anything else that was going on and I was excited to have an interaction. Which again goes back to how I did not enjoy the gunplay. So running into them was never a moment of, oh great, I get to shoot these guys. It was always a moment of, alright, guess I gotta kill these guys now. And it's just unfortunate that that is the mindset that the game put me in because I didn't enjoy the shooting. And because these gang members always showed up when I was doing something else, it led me to hate them even more because they would just kill the thing I was trying to take back. And it just made them so annoying. They weren't even really a problem most of the time. They were just annoying. Then we get into money, because that's what the gang members want. That's what you have to use to shop. It's a very important part of this game, is the money that you use to purchase the things and the money that you get. It's important to the story as well, but the money that you personally have does not affect the story anyway whatsoever. Early on, you need money, and you don't know yet that your personal money does not help the story at all. So we did a lot of hunting. I did a lot of hunting. I did a lot of side missions, did a lot of breaking into people's houses, did a lot of looting corpses, just trying to get as much money as I could to help out the gang. The problem becomes, as you do story missions, they just start handing you thousands of dollars of money. And then over and over throughout the story, you hear, you know, hey, we gotta have money so we can do this. And it's like, I have $3,000 on me right now. How much more do we need? Like, I'm walking around with this. You gotta have a bunch too, right, Dutch? Like, what all do we need? And it just leads to situations of the game going, yeah, we don't have enough money to do this yet, but if it's a little bit longer, a couple more takes and we'll have it. But I already have more money than we're gonna get from that job in my pocket. And it also completely negates the need to go hunting, negates the need to go fishing, negates the need to skin animals or loot bodies, negates the need to break into houses or do any of those missions anymore, because you already have all the money you need. We've got all the upgrades to the camp. Everything's great. And I'm still sitting on $1,000. I can pay off any bounty that I get. I can buy all the food we need. Never have to worry about ammo again. Like, what is the point of all of these systems if your main story negates them like this? And so it immediately made me stop caring about all those side activities because we didn't need to do them anymore. I still did a couple of the legendary hunts because I wanted to hunt some legendary animals. But it wasn't really important anymore because we had all the money in the world. This leads into the story itself for me, which is a mixed bag. The story is the thing about this game that I like the most. And if you think, man, Trey, for the last 30 minutes or so, you've been super negative, would really like to hear some positives. Most of my positives are in the story. There are still some negatives that are in this story, but there are some positives as well. I think the idea of the gang, of the group that John talks about in 1, that Bill and Javier and Dutch were a part of in 1, and going back and seeing that story is a cool idea. I really do. And were it executed a little bit better in some places, I think it would actually be a really good story, hands down, no strings attached. But the execution of the story I have some problems with. The first chapter is pretty good. The first chapter up in the snow, with everything going on there and trying to survive, that's a pretty fun chapter. having to deal with the O'Driscolls and everything there, and knowing that, you know, some of your people are missing. Where's John Marston? Knowing that some of your people are dead. We don't know anything really about Mac, but we know that he's dead at this point, and he was a part of the crew. Like, that's cool to me. Having to figure out, you know, how to hunt and how to skin animals, because the gang needs food to survive. That was really enjoyable. Chapter 2 kind of led into, like, Chapter 1 and 2 kind of led into spinning our wheels, which is the biggest issue I have with the story of this game, in that a lot of the time it feels like we are just spinning our wheels as we gather some money and get into hijinks and get into trouble without really getting anywhere for a very long time. And just like little by little people are dying, but it doesn't really matter much because we're not going anywhere. So like we bring in Kieran and we get Sean and they're really cool and I like them a lot. And then Kieran gets no development. And Sean gets a little bit of development and he's really cool and Lenny's really cool and Hosea's really cool and we're hanging out and we're doing stuff and we're singing at camp and we're playing dominoes at camp, but we're not really furthering the story in any great way, but we're having a good time, so that was okay. And then things start to curve, where we get into the stuff with the Braithwaites and the Greys, and we're playing these two families against each other, and there's a Romeo and Juliet story that is not important to the rest of the story at all, really. And there's Dutch pretending that he's going straight to help out Sheriff Gray, and then Hosea is smoozing the Braithwaite like grandmother, and all of that feels like it's not going anywhere. Until all of a sudden it's just, oh man, Jack got kidnapped, we gotta move. We gotta figure out what's going on. We gotta go get the boy back. And to be fair, that sequence is really cool. Of like everybody riding to the Braithwaite Manor and everything going on there. But you also have the stupidity that is Micah and Bill constantly causing problems. We know the Pinkertons are after us, and it just feels like every character should be going, Dutch, this is not how we want to do this. Like, there's a lot of people after us. We should probably not be stirring up problems. But everybody's just going, yeah, sure, Dutch, okay. Arthur and Hosea are starting to voice complaints, but every time they just get talked down, and everybody just goes along with it. And the further the story goes, the more that becomes a problem. Until eventually in the story, Arthur does begin to fight back. But by that point, it's so late that I feel like I had decided, Dutch, we can't do this a long time before Arthur did. And it took me out of the story in a really, really obvious way for me. From there, you get into the moment where Dutch hits his head and the reactions to that. And that was the moment that I broke with the, hey, Arthur cannot continue just following whatever Dutch says. And he does just keep doing what Dutch says. And he's voicing his complaints, but we're still going, and we still have quite a bit of game to go from that point. We have to break into Bronte's stuff, and some of that stuff is still cool, like in the graveyard with John and everything there. But by this point, we've lost so many people. And it only gets worse, and nobody's starting to really stop and go, hey, no, Dutch, no, except for Arthur, and nobody's backing him up on it. And then John starts backing him up on it, but then John gets captured, and so then it's back to just Arthur, and it doesn't stop. You get this whole offshoot on the island that, honestly, I feel like didn't have to be in the game at all. I feel like it would have been fine. Like, there's a moment where Javier gets left behind, and you're like, hey, maybe Javier is actually going to have more doubts about Dutch now, and that's why everything happened in 1, but that never comes up again. Even at the big final climactic moment where Javier sides with Dutch, that never gets brought up again. And the whole island sequence kind of felt completely unneeded at all. I want to talk about Micah and Bill for a little bit before we get into Dutch or Arthur or the last moments of the story. Because there are, I know I've gotten back to negative again, right? But there are some positives coming up, I promise. Micah and Bill are terrible. Like, Micah is at least a character you love to hate, but Bill is just stupid. And the fact that people in the game keep trusting Bill to do things is ridiculous to me. Like, Bill is the reason that Sean gets killed. That, like, Arthur throws a fit about that, and then it never comes up again. Kieran dies, and there's no fanfare. He dies off screen. There's no fanfare about it or anything. You just get to see his head brought in. And it's like, man, we didn't even know anything about Kieran other than that he left the O'Driscolls behind. That's literally all we knew. You have Micah just constantly being shady, being abrasive, obviously worm-tonguing Dutch. Like, he's at all times trying to lead Dutch down the wrong path. It was very obvious from the start who the rat was, and nobody tells Dutch, you shouldn't listen to Micah anymore, other than Arthur. And Dutch just keeps listening to Micah, and it's forgivable after the head injury. But Micah's such a yes man while also being a rat, and it in some places it kind of made me dislike Dutch more, and I really liked Dutch as a villain in 1. It made me dislike Dutch more that he's just letting himself be worm-tongued like this when he's supposed to be smarter than that. Dutch himself, though, I do think is a pretty good villain in this game. The way that he is constantly doing what's best for himself and claiming that he's doing what's best for the group, but is always doing what's best for himself, is really good. I like the way that he continues to rope people in with his flowery words, and people continue to fall for it over and over. And other villains in this game continue to underestimate just how persuasive Dutch can be. The problem comes in the fact that once Dutch hits his head and loses his mind and becomes, like, way more interesting of a character, he also becomes extremely one-note in the game. Because from then on, you know that everything Dutch says is crazy, but everybody just keeps going with it. And it's like, no, Dutch, but maybe we don't. No, okay, we're just gonna do it. This all leads to the worst Dutch moment in the game for me, which is the final moment with Dutch, where after everything, he's literally risked everything to have Micah on his side and to build up a group, and you have walked through his camp as John Marston and killed all of his people, and are now face to face with Micah, guns drawn on each other. He shoots Micah and walks away. He leaves the money behind. He doesn't try to talk you into anything. He walks away. And that is so not Dutch that it bothered me so much. Dutch just leaves everything behind to start anew, I guess. And it was just unfathomable for me that would happen. That also, of course, hurts John's dialogue with Dutch in RDR1, where it seems like they haven't seen each other since the gang broke apart, because that was a couple years after the gang broke apart already, but, you know, hey, sure, okay. Just ignore that in RDR1, I guess, because it happened after RDR1. Timeline, it happened before it timeline-wise, but after it world timeline-wise. And it just was really weird to me to see such an interesting character get shoved into this weird role of being a hero at the end when he was never a hero. He thought he was a hero, but he wasn't, and so to see him be a hero at the end felt completely antithetical to his character. This is offset by the moment at the end of the main game where Micah and Arthur are fighting on this mountaintop, and Dutch doesn't help Arthur or Micah. He just walks away. Like, that's so much more of a Dutch thing of, this is not my problem anymore. So the moment in the epilogue where he shoots Micah just really feels wrong to me. Please, in the comments down below, if you have a different opinion on that, let me know, but it just feels wrong to me. I want to talk about my positives, though, which are Arthur Morgan and John Marston, as well as a little bit of Lenny and Sean and Kieran. I think that John Marston has done very well in this game. I think that John Marston in 1 didn't have a lot of story based around him, right? A lot of the story was based around other people and how he helped them and how he was trying to be a better person than who he used to be and his interactions with his family. And so this John, you see the start of that in this John. He's still doing bad things, but he's trying to do better. And you can really tell the logical move from this John Marston to the John Marston of RDR1. It's almost perfect continuance. The problems with John in this game come with the fact that for a lot of the game, it feels like he's just around. Like, he's not speaking up to Dutch. He's not putting his voice out there. He's just around. And then in the epilogue, where you play as John, a lot of what you're doing is just ancillary almost. Like, it doesn't even really matter. And it leads to some really weird moments of, how did John get his gray shirt that he wears in RDR1? Better tell that story. How did John get Beecher's Hope? Better tell that story. Where'd he get the money to pay off that debt? Better tell that story. And it was like, none of that needed to be told, though. Like, I didn't need to see John Marston build his house on Beecher's Hope to know that he had a house at Beecher's Hope. And so, almost the entirety of the epilogue has some really good moments of John with Abigail, and John with Jack, and John with Uncle. But John's story itself really felt like it didn't need to be there. And I'll get into the tonal whiplash of it after I get done talking about Arthur. But there's some really bad tonal whiplash moments in the epilogue. The biggest one being a moment where you complete a mission to bring the materials to the house. And on the way of that mission, because in every mission of this game, it feels like something has to go wrong and you have to wind up in a shootout. You get attacked by the Skinners. And one of the guys that's with you gets his face stabbed to a tree and is killed. And it's very horrific. And it's a very, powerful moment almost where John is like, like, you can tell he's upset that this guy, he didn't even know this guy, but that this guy died to help bring this stuff to the house. And it's almost a somber moment of, one of the last lines in this mission is Charles saying, I'll send some money to his family. And you hard cut from that when you get back to Beecher's Hope. You walk to the next mission, which is just a very short distance away. You start that mission up, and it's like a hard cut of building the house and playing a peppy, happy song and hammering nails. And on stream, I literally said, no, you can't do that. Because it was such a tone changer. It was honestly tonal whiplash. It took a moment that was really somber and went right from that into this super peppy, happy moment of building this house and hammer that nail and raise that board. And it was like, you cannot, when you're telling a story, do that and expect your audience to be happy with that. Because then that scene just becomes a ridiculous moment of, what? How? And I'm sure what they expected was for you to go do some hunting or something in between those two missions or go do a different mission. That mission was right there, so of course that's what I did. I didn't have to have a ride somewhere to have downtime in between those two because the mission before took me to Beecher's Hope. And it was just this really obvious moment of what are you doing that reminded me that this game was not written by just one person, it was written by a team, and I have to question if the two people writing those missions had a conversation about whether or not they should be back-to-back or not, because having those two missions back-to-back is a big problem for me. Most of the missions in this game give you a time between where you can decompress from whatever terrible moment just happened as you're riding to the next mission. But again, because that mission brought you to Beecher's Hope, there was no in-between. So it was just this moment of extreme somber, extreme sadness, to this moment of extreme joy. And normally it works great the other way around, but not like that. I want to talk about Arthur for a little bit, though. Because the other example of tonal whiplash, though not as bad as that one, is the cut from the end of the game to the start of the epilogue, where you leave Arthur's story and go into John's. And again, it's not as bad. I noticed it, but it didn't make me go, come on. Made me go, man, this probably could have been handled better. But Arthur Morgan in this game starts out as a rough and tough cowboy, right? And he's fun as that. He's really enjoyable as that. But where he goes over the course of this game is honestly the thing about this game that makes it worth it to me. You're having to put up with the gang, you're having to put up with Dutch, you're having to put up with Micah and Bill. And that's a lot to ask, put up with Micah and Bill. But over the course of this game, Arthur Morgan goes from that rough and gruff cowboy to a man who is dying. And who has to choose how he wants to spend his last days. Who he wants to help and who he wants to hurt. How he wants to handle the next month of his life that may be all he has left. As Arthur Morgan starts to deal with tuberculosis. And I'll fully admit, this is like super close to home for me. As a severe persistent asthmatic, it's something that having to see him struggle to breathe really hits home for me. And the way they handled his illness in this game, his lung problem, his lung disease in this game is perfect. It shines in the gameplay. It shines in cutscenes. It shines in just the way he looks. It's in his very stats. He can no longer be at full health anymore. He can no longer run as long anymore. When you try to eat, he chokes while eating because he's having to learn how to eat with less air. It's insane how much effort they put into Arthur Morgan and the way that he as a character works. And again, Arthur Morgan is the reason to play this game. Every scene, well, most of the scenes before, but every scene after Arthur goes to the doctor is plagued, you could say, by his disease. It's colored by who he has to become. Whether he wants to or not, he is dying. And he has a very short amount of time left, and he has to choose. And the interactions from there, as he meets different characters and they comment on it, as he meets various people and new people, strangers that he's never met before, and has to decide how he's going to interact with them, as he treats everybody in the gang differently. And seeing the way that they all treat him differently now that they know what he's got. It's very powerful. And it quickly became a situation where Arthur Morgan wasn't just my favorite character in this game. He was one of my favorite characters in anything. And I honestly think playing as Arthur Morgan is worth playing this entire game for. Because you see the way it changes. It changes everything for this character. And his journey, him trying to protect Eagle Flies and trying to help out Rain's Fall, and him trying to help John and Abigail and get Sadie and Jack and all of them away from the gang. That great final struggle where he and John and Miss Grimshaw face off against Dutch and Micah and Bill and Javier. The escape through the mountainside, and finally that last clash between him and Micah on the mountaintop. All I wanted to do as Arthur was kill Micah. It's that last thing that I did. You don't get to do it. You don't get to just finish him off. He gets away. And Arthur has to lean back against this rock face and watch the rising of the sun and die, hoping that he did enough to help John Marston, his brother, escape. It's such a good moment. And it's colored so well by dialogue popping up from throughout the entire game. Just coming unbidden to you as you ride to that last mission, of all these different great moments. And One of the best moments in the game for me is when Eagle Flies gets shot trying to save Arthur Morgan. And Arthur says, "You shouldn't have had to die for a man like me." And that line works as, he's dying too. So this young man shouldn't have traded his life for this older man who's dying. But it also works as I've not been a good man. This young man should not have had to die for me. You have the final moments with the sister at the train station where, and I understand that you could have it with Reverend Swanson instead, but with the sister at the train station where she talks to him and Arthur's like, "I'm scared." And it's such a great moment that doesn't happen in most games, where a character just talks about their problem, knowing that there's no fix for it, but hoping someone can help them, especially a tough character like Arthur. I gotta bring it back because I'm starting to break. Arthur Morgan is worth playing this game for, even with all the problems. I just wish that there weren't those problems around him. Finally, I want to talk about a couple other small things. Some pros, some cons. I want to start with the cons. I think it's a big problem they never talk about any stories with Mac or Jenny or any of the characters that died before you got there, so you don't get to know anything about them. The characters that don't develop at all, like Kieran, or Lenny, really, like you get some times with Lenny just to hang out and have a good time, but Lenny doesn't really get a character arc. He just is there and does cool stuff, and he's fun, and then he dies. You have, man, Kieran gets nothing. Sean gets nothing. Sean gets some good, Sean does get a couple things. He gets a really good moment with Arthur, where he just wants Arthur to look at Sean the way that he would look at, like, Javier, right? Like, look, I'm dependable, I can do this. And then he just dies. And you don't get anything else from that. And all the good characters start to die, and all the bad characters remain. The camp falls apart, and that is a pro, that the camp winds up becoming home, and then home is broken and is not home anymore. And you don't want to go back there as much anymore because it doesn't feel like home anymore. But the con is that it would have felt way more like home if there had been some more work put into developing those characters. If I had gone back to camp and Sean's tent had been empty and there'd been, like, even just a letter that was like, "Hey Arthur, I want you to know how I feel about this," or like, "Send this back to me ma," or something like that, that would have been so much more. And then when you got the camp set up at the next place and Sean's tent wasn't there, it would have meant something, So I think that's a big con. The honor system in the game is really difficult to keep up, especially when you're in gunfights with people on horses, and if you accidentally kill a horse, you lose a decent chunk of honor for killing a horse. Like, but all these people are riding horses, and, like, if I'm gonna shoot them, I might shoot the horse, and it's, well, too bad. You better just keep doing good things so that you outweigh the number of times you shoot a horse. Just a bunch of little things like that. The fact that your horse, when it gets spooked, will stay spooked until you calm it down, even if you've rode a very long distance away, that's kind of annoying. The fact that you can only have 4 horses total, like, it's ridiculous to me. There's, like, 5 stables in this world. Why can't each of them house 3 horses? Because, like, at one point, I got a really cool horse, and I had to sell I had to sell Kentaros to be able to put Helios in the stable. And then later on, when you help out Hamish and he gives you Buell as his, like, dying request, I had to sell Helios to take in Buell because you can only have 4 horses. Like, come on, man. The last couple pros that I have, you can pet dogs, play with dogs in this game. That's really cool. Characters will recognize you that you've talked to before, and so you can have some conversations to catch up with them. And my last big pro, if you donate money to the Veterans Building, Veterans Memorial in Saint Denis as Arthur Morgan, you can come back there as John Marston and see Arthur Morgan's name on that plaque. And John will reference it. And it's just really cool to see the decisions that you made making a difference in the game world. All in all, though, I do think this game is worth playing for Arthur alone. I don't know if it's worth $60 if you're not super into the story, if you just care about gameplay. But I do think Arthur makes this game worth it. I did enjoy a lot of my time with this game. I just didn't enjoy more of it, if that makes sense. This is a game that I am not going to play again anytime soon. Because playing this game is not fun for me. Enjoying the story of this game was fun, but playing this game was not fun for me. And although, yes, I connected with Arthur on a I guess a physical level is the way to word it, with my lung disease that's not going away. And I do believe that had part to do with why I like Arthur so much. I do think he's a good enough character that even if you don't have a lung disease, you can come to appreciate him. Because I did enjoy Arthur even before that point. And things like him saying, sure, is going to be like stuck in my head for a very long time. I'm still going to make that reference, I'm sure. But this game has a lot of problems. And if you've sat through almost an hour of me talking about it, I hope that you can understand where I'm coming from, and that at the end of the day, you can make your own decision based on the things that I've talked about, even though I've spoiled everything for you. I do still think playing for Arthur's story is worth it. With all that said, though, I have been Trey. This has been the Full Spectrum. And remember to always enjoy the full spectrum. Red Dead Redemption 2 has to offer.